beans. Not a whole bunch of bad things that you can say about them if we're being honest. That's why, if you're looking at the title right now, you'll see it's green gray. And that's because there's arguments both for beans as a green, which is, oh man, really hard to impossible to complain about, and as a gray, which is kind of ambiguous towards just from a personal standpoint, and then also a little bit difficult to argue about, but we'll complain about it anyway, essentially. So, at least from my perspective, and I think from many of the viewers' perspectives, and probably the world as a whole, beans are great. Great source of protein or whatever the hell they have in them. Great source of taste. They taste awesome. You got black beans, you got pinto beans. You can put that shit in so many dishes. Are you kidding, man? Like tacos, burritos. I'm trying to get away from the Mexican food analogy. I can't seem to do it. Other foods that also have beans. What's that thing you eat on New
Black eyed
Year's?
peas.
Yeah, yeah, black eyed.
Black.
Well, is that New Year's? What's the
It's a pea.
what? Is that not a bean? I'll assume it's a bean.
I we can assume it's a bean. That's a gray issue.
I'd love to pull up the
That's a
Wikipedia on
gray
that. That is
issue.
a great
Yeah,
issue.
what makes it a pea and not a bean?
Well,
Here's a complaint.
let's hear it.
Here's a gray complaint. Beans are ugly. As a food, the bean
I
is not aesthetically pleasing.
I I can't argue with that. I think it's color dependent though, for being honest, for most of the beans. Like
You can
sometimes,
say it's color dependent, but at the same time, if you cook a bean and you mess up even slightly, it just becomes mush.
that's true.
It becomes incredibly
Well,
ugly.
it's not just that, but also like the shape of beans. Like I don't think I've ever seen anyone look at the shape of a bean and say like that's something that can't be improved upon. Like I feel like
If the bean the bean is not circular enough to be an appealing circle, but the bean is also not non-circular enough to be an appealing non-circle.
well, it's like
It's
slightly offset. Like
it's
it's
like I took like a spear full of sand and I like dropped it on like the pavement
yeah, it's
and
it's
it just sort of slightly deformed. That's what a bean
it's
looks like.
halfway to logic. It's not that's not something that you want to see just generally. If you're let's say you're the great creator and you're coming in and making something, you're making an object. The thing that you want to make is not going to want to be a halfway between like amalgamous and then circular. You want a nice like either this and that. But once again though, that is just the shape. I feel like there's a lot more to be said about, from a taste perspective, cultural perspective, just general perspective. Like beans are great, man. Taste,
I
at least,
honestly,
nothing else.
honestly, has anything in the world been more influential than the bean
That's a really good
since the
question.
Columbian
That's a
Exchange?
damn good question.
The Columbian Exchange, giant transfer of biomass from Europe to the New World and vice versa. Was anything more influential than the bean in that?
I'd see. I'm not gonna say you're a nerd, but regardless, I feel like beans in themselves hold a lot of power. Nobody. When you think of like basic food groups, you think of like, oh man, corn's bean squash. Like people love that term, man.
Yeah.
In history, that's a historical term. That's not something that just like is thrown out the window. But this, once again, this is looking at it from the view of kind of like general importance. We need to be more on the complaints head. What can we complain about in reference to beans? A lot of people say smell. That's a good one. That's a big hitter. Over time, you leave beans in your fridge for a little bit too long, it's over. That fridge is gassed, man. It's through. And what
And on a similar note to smell, there is a poem that I could bring up.
I think that is an excellent point. That's another hard
We won't
hitter.
say it.
Is that a
We
negative
won't say
though?
it.
That's
Is it?
that's
I think you can probably say that that's a negative.
I'd suppose
But I don't think that the negatives don't outweigh the positives.
that's true.
The beans are
And,
culturally are a staple
see,
throughout the world.
and that ultimately is why I personally think it's a green. Now I know that you yourself are arguing for it being a gray, and I can understand that. There's a lot of drop offs, a lot of problems with the bean, kind of on a larger scale thing. But thinking subjectively, especially in comparison to a lot of things that we've gone over previously on this channel, I think the beans are a solid green or gray on the list. I'm
And
personally
I
going to
think
go with
that's
green.
fair.
It
I
will,
think that's fair.
overall, one vote for green, one vote for gray. We'll take it in stride. Beans, pretty damn good. Pretty damn good. Beans.
Beans.